All right, there we go, Paul. I pressed the start button. So now everything you say will be recorded. And so we chatted just the other day, and kind of excited to have you back on right away and maybe do a semi-regular conversation. And there was a question that came up via email from a teacher, so it's kind of a neat thing to look at. And the wording of it I thought was particularly interesting. So it was, how does the average teacher become more connected?
Okay.
And I thought it was kind of interesting that they chose to say average teacher, right?
Well, I don't think there's no such thing as an average teacher. Anyone who decides to do this kind of work is pretty extraordinary. So, but teachers sometimes can see themselves that way, that if they're not connected, they see themselves as average, and that they have to be doing something extraordinary to kind of give themselves greater value. And I don't really buy that at all, because I know some terrific teachers who they're not Twitter users or anything like that, and that does not take away their exceptionality. They connect in a bunch of other ways. So yeah, I can think of some really great ways that a teacher could connect. But that average teacher, maybe the question back to her would be, okay, take a minute to reflect. How are you connecting with them?
Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, how are you connected, what it is that you do. And then, like, the thing about the average thing that I was thinking is it's telling in a couple ways. Like, one, it's diminishing of the person who's saying, well, okay, so I'm not connected, so I'm not spectacular. But also it's kind of interesting that being a connected teacher, maybe it's not considered the norm. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, why is that? Because I mean, I think that
yeah.
And then I guess, I mean, then the question is how you define connected teacher. Because I mean, the person who is not on Twitter but is finding other ways to interact with other teachers, and their classroom is not insular, and they are involved in other things and always learning and all that stuff. Well, they're a connected teacher. They're just not on Twitter. Like, that doesn't define a connected teacher, I don't think, whether or not you're on Twitter. But it's interesting to me that is not considered the sort of standard of practice or the average base that you'd be sort of connected out in the world. But anyway.
Yeah. I think teachers are connecting in a whole variety of ways, and they talk a lot about this with kids, but it should be the same for anybody, is that and this is the reflective piece of education, that a lot of times we're learning, but we're not reflecting on the learning. And I was talking to someone yesterday, and we were saying, geez, I heard that lesson first time about 30 years ago, when we were taught, before even I got into teaching. We were doing non-traditional education with groups of kids. And one of the instructors talked to us and said, look, one of your jobs is going to be, these kids are going to be doing amazing things. Like, they might build a log house, for instance, first time ever doing that. And then when you talk to the kid, what do they say? What have you learned? I said, I'm not going to just build a log house. So, no, you learned all sorts of things, but people don't necessarily make the leap to reflecting on their learning. That's one of the reasons podcasts like this are useful. Blogging is actually very good, because I think it's at least a two-step process. You're doing the learning, then you have to reflect on it. So again, going back to that teacher, my question to the teacher would be, okay, you need to reflect on where you're connecting, how you're connecting, and where you want to go next. So it's more complex than that. But let's start from where you're at and where you want to move to. And it's really frustrating for teachers, I have found, if you tell them this is how you have to connect. You all have to be on Voxer next week, and you need to be involved in all these chats or whatever. Like,
right.
Generally speaking, they just won't do it, because they say, well, you can't make me do it, and I'm fully committed already. So it's the reflection part. If I had more if I had more time and I could do more work on professional development with teachers, I would be much more interested in flipping the conversation with a group of people who said, okay, I need to know where you all are. Okay, and then next, where do you want to go? And don't be, okay, I want to be like George Couros, and I want to be blogging every day. I said, no, that's not reasonable. Like, the guy's been doing this for years, and that's how he makes his living. Like, you need to be looking at someone who has doing similar work to you, might be a little bit further down the road than you, and then aspire to work like that person.
Right.
Start just baby steps.
The baby steps, reasonable goals. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I like the idea of sort of knowing where you want to go. I also like this that you're saying of not saying forcing what sort of way you need to connect. So I was thinking as you were doing that, I was scribbling down of like my steps to connection. I think are twofold. So the first step I feel like is like knowledge hunting. And for me, I use Twitter for that, where I'm prospecting and looking generally over what's just sort of happening in the world. It's like skimming through the newspaper, but specifically for education. And there's a bunch of different tools that you can use for that. And I don't necessarily dig deep into anything. And then there was a term I was introduced to last night called your knowledge trap. And then I think that's the second step is you have to have your knowledge trap. So I look around and I find what sort of things might interest me. And then I pluck out those who actually do interest me, put those aside in my knowledge trap, and whether I'm using what's this, a whiteboard app, or there's all sorts of things you can use to put that in there. And then when I have time, I can go back to those and do deeper dives into that, whether I'm reading articles or listening to podcasts or whatever, to actually really deep dive into universal design learning or whatever it might be that I've decided it has piqued my interest. Yeah. And then I think presenting that to a teacher might make a little more sense. Like, here's a process. Process is you look, and then once you've looked, then you find a way to deep dive into it. And you can use, here are a whole bunch of different tools that you could use to satisfy those two needs.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the things I was looking at, and I was trying to write a blog post about this morning, and I kind of got stuck on it. I was trying to explore the whole idea of digital integration. So a slightly different topic, but why it's so difficult for that to take place. I was talking to a principal last week who was saying about her school, she finds that a lot of people are at the substitution level, and they're kind of stuck at that level, and how come they're not going beyond that? So I was trying to write a piece this morning to try and figure that out, and I didn't get that far. But one of the things that I think might be the key, and this is a structural change in education in Ontario, is the amount of time that we're in front of kids. In a lot of other countries, the amount of time teachers are in front of kids is far less than what we do here in Canada, and especially in the States, which is one of the highest ratios in the world. I think as professionals, we need to give teachers more time to do that kind of research and study, that they self-direct, and we talked about that last time, but they do it during the day, like most professions. Somehow in this profession, we expect people to do their learning, all their learning, after they've worked a full day. And right. Like, you have a teacher who's in front of a group of grade 7 kids from 9 o'clock till 3 o'clock, and then they may have a family, and then we expect them to go ahead and then, okay, let's get out there and do some learning, like go on Twitter for an hour and a half. Like, that's crazy. That's ridiculous. So we need to kind of look and respect the teacher's day and how draining it is to be on for that length of time, and then where are they supposed to do their learning in other countries. And I was just trying to find a good article on that, and I didn't get that far. I wanted to see, okay, in comparison to other countries in the world, what's the percentage of time that Canadian teachers spend in front of the classroom as compared to other countries? I know years ago, years ago, when Mike Harris, with the Mike Harris government, one of the things that they really wanted to do was they wanted to see more, the percentage of teacher time in direct contact with kids go up. And it was kind of a neoconservative idea, like, this is what teachers should be doing. They should be in front of kids the whole time. And that idea, I think, is changing, I hope, because how do we expect our teachers to really get into the idea of creating contact, getting further down the SAMR model, if we're not giving them time to do that?
It's a grand point, right? Like, I mean, even just looking at, say, look at flipped classroom and this desire to, you got to create that content so that it can support the child at home. And there is about some research doing lately that if you're doing that content should be created by the teacher. but there's less connection from the student. If it's like if I'm ripping off Khan Academy and using that, there's less connection with the student with that sort of piece of flipped content than it would be from the teacher creating, say, this video that goes home. But then when do they do it, right? Like if you're super motivated and your work-life balance allows you to do that in the evening, like good on you, but that shouldn't be the generalized expectation, I don't think.
No, and I'm trying to think of one guy who does this in the States. He does Hip Hughes, I think it's Hip Hughes History, and he does a lot of this stuff. He has on YouTube hundreds of videos, and what he does is he will teach a lesson on, I don't know, let's say the Depression in the United States or something like that. So he's a history teacher in the States, does brilliant lessons. But he's set himself up. He's an expert using green screen. He has really good camera technology, and he's developed over the time. And he's a natural.
Right.
He could have his own show. The guy's phenomenal. But he's a real showman. Like this is his thing. So not all of us are going to be like Hip Hughes and be able to do that kind of stuff. So you could use his stuff, but you're totally right. You're using someone else's content. Content creation is extremely difficult to do. Like anyone who does blogging like you do, or podcasting like you do, or tries to write a regular blog and hold down a full-time job, realizes how impossible it is. So you're asking teachers to flip their classrooms and to create their own content. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it's a huge ask. So I mean, but with building within the system that we have right now, agreed. So if we can figure out a way to get more time, that would certainly make a lot of sense. But saying we can't, finding a way to become a connected educator sort of within your class setting as it exists. So we're talking about this idea of Twitter, or this idea of searching for information. The other is just within the class itself. So some teachers have done a really good job of using that class time as learning time and content creation and that sort of thing happening. Like I've talked to a few teachers doing podcasts like with their kids, like it's happening in the class, right? And not necessarily thinking that the learning time is over here and the class time is over here, and they can't integrate together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I can. That actually makes a lot of sense, and there's a lot of ways I think now that you can do that kind of stuff. I've never thought.
I had a teacher who was saying, and I don't know why this shouldn't be revolutionary. It was so simple when he said it, but he was saying that he blogs about his class, understandably. So he's an math teacher and he blogs about whatever lessons just happened, and the homework is that the students comment on the blog.
Perfect.
And it was like, oh, like of course they comment on the blog because they just experienced the lesson. So who's better to comment on the blog about the lesson than the kids who just had the lesson?
Yeah.
Right.
That's a really, I remember trying that. I went back into the classroom a few years ago. I was teaching grade 6 class, and we started doing blogging, and it didn't get far enough. I got transferred into another job, so I didn't really get a chance to develop it. But I was beginning to learn some pretty cool things. We were doing a read aloud, and actually it was the Hunger Games. And so I asked the kids to comment to the blog on just the reading. And what I found out, and you would never find this out in the classroom, the boys loved it. They thought this was great. Okay. And the girls did not. They said, no, it's too much, it's too violent. But they would never ever say that in the classroom. But they would comment on it, and I could allow a comment to go public or keep it private. And obviously that one I kept private. But it actually informed my teaching. And I said, this is a few years ago. And then I became a principal, so I kind of stopped having the opportunity to do that stuff. But I said, this blows my mind. This is amazing because I'm learning from the kids at night. And there was a whole, you could go down that road and do a lot of great stuff. And in essence, you are flipping the class to a certain extent, and you are creating your own content because you're giving kids questions that they have to blog about. Whether it's closed or open doesn't really matter, but That's an excellent example. And for me, it was like 4 or 5 years ago now, and I still remember that one instance, and just the learning that came out of that for me.
Absolutely. I mean, now I'm sort of talking my way through it. I think that might be a good thing to suggest when someone's trying to be connected and not sure how to make it work, is why not integrate that into your class time? I mean, there's a lot of teachers on Twitter who aren't themselves, right? They're their class. Yeah. And that kind of changes the dynamic a bit. Like, I kind of appreciate that I can talk as an educator and talk for myself, and you can't necessarily speak for your class in the same way, but it still gets you out there. It still lets you take a look at what's going on. So it's certainly a step. Like, if you don't think you have the time, if you don't think you have the ability outside of your class realm to get connected, why not get connected sort of within it? And when you're bringing in guest speakers, or you're bringing, or your class blogging, or your class podcasting, which I've been really pushing lately. I really want to see an active class podcast. I haven't seen one yet, but I think it can be done really easily. I think, because I saw somebody do a podcast on their phone really effectively. So you using your phone recorder, it works quite well as long as you lean into it and speak quite closely to it. And then I saw another class that was doing audio control or audio recording with these Tupperware bins that they've lined with foam, and it became its own little audio booth. So if you have two kids with their faces in the Tupperware bin and a phone, I think you can get a really good sound recording. You could do that sort of throughout your class. You don't have to send them out into the hall. You don't have, you could do that within one space and pretty actively do something, which is, I was calling it light tech. Like, it's pretty easy to manage. And then my sort of final piece about that idea of really wanting to get kids to podcast is that it can almost be anonymous, right? Like, if you don't see my face and you don't know my name, you're probably not going to know who I am. So like, I think there'd be a lot of comfort level from the kid and from the parent that that they'd be podcasting, and you're still sharing your ideas, you're still putting your ideas out there. They can be commented on, they're out in the ether and in the world, but you're not putting your face necessarily out there.
Yeah. No, I see their value in that. The other thing that's valuable about that is the whole notion of audience. That when kids podcast or when kids blog and it's open, it's quite amazing because people will start commenting on their stuff, and that really changes the whole game, because they know they're not just writing for their teacher or for a few classmates. They're writing for people who can be anywhere.
Right. Well, I really try to take some time out of my day and occasionally post on student blogs, because I mean, I know how cool it feels. Like when I get a post from somebody who I've never met before from another part of the world that puts a comment on one of my pieces of work, like, it feels great that someone's taking the time to do it. So I can only assume that from a child's perspective, it would feel great too.
Yeah.
These bulletin boards, right? You walk by these bulletin boards with these beautiful bits of text, sometimes huge, and they're not really getting read. No, I think it makes a big difference. And I've tried to encourage it. You can also do really simple things like putting on gadgets on your blog, so you can see it anytime someone reads your blog. You have a little globe revolving around, and part of it lights up. And then, that's cool.
I've shown that to kids before. I've shown it to teachers before. I said, can you imagine how cool that would be for a student? They have their blog running, and you've entered that gadget in there. So you have a revolving, I think it's called revolving globe or something like this. And every time, and then after you've been doing your blog for a few months, you say, oh my God, someone in India read a blog post. Like, they didn't comment on it. Commenting is kind of rare, but they read it. And
they opened it up and they read it, yeah.
And I see that from my blog. I have a blog that I put out to the teachers, but it's open. And I take a look at the globe I put on, and I have people from all over the world who've looked at it. And even for me, that's a motivator. So, I guess I'm doing something that people find interesting. But can you
I love looking at my stats. So I have my stats on this podcast, right? And then each podcast gets broken down of who watched it or who listened to it and how many times and where they're from, and it's great to see. It's a nice little indicator. It's good to know that people are listening and are interested, right? Yeah.
Well, everybody needs to have some incentive. It doesn't matter who it is. Like, no matter how famous they are when it comes to doing this stuff, or they're just doing their own stuff, everybody needs to be able to get something back. So you're not just writing stuff out and it's going nowhere. Whether it's a retweet or a mention or just being able to see, oh, this tweet was read 60 times. That's, to me, I find that very useful. And it's a real motivator. Like, it's not like I get tons of feedback, but just to know that it's getting out there and it's resonating with some people I think that's very important. And I think that'd be a good motivator too.
Yeah, well, it helps authenticate it, right? Like, I mean, I've spent some time reflecting on my lesson plans on my little sheet that goes in the binder and then gets tucked away. And why am I doing that? Yeah. Right? So now I'm reflecting in ways that are out in the world, and people, maybe they can comment or not, but they can, like, it's out there, and I can, and it authenticates it for me. It makes me more motivated to do it. I mentioned before on this that I always understood the point of a blog. I never was very good at it. I had a hard time being motivated towards it. This for me is a lot easier. And then it's like it gets ramped up. So the more I do it, the easier it is. The more comments I get, the more I want to do more. The more people show interest in being on the podcast, and off it goes. So that's my personal thing. But I can only assume that would play out with a child the same way. Right? If you spend a whole lot of time and you craft this story and you quote publish it to the bulletin board where maybe your parent sees it on parent-teacher night, that's about it. That's not super motivating, no. Right? But if other people could see it, or that other people could, and like, I like this idea of knowing who read it, because the reality is it takes time to comment, and it's rarish. There's a sea of blogs out there. It's hard to get to all of them, and you're probably not getting a ton of comments. But reads, you probably are, and you get that same sort of feeling. Oh, somebody's reading it, and they're not in my building, and they're how cool is that? Yeah.
So, and there's more and more tools to do that. We're doing we have a PD day on Friday, and one of our teachers is doing a little workshop on Seesaw, which he uses in his class. And again,
I've been learning about Seesaw. It looks really neat.
Yeah, so he's going to show that to all the staff, and as a communication tool of getting information out there, it's excellent, and it has a blog attached to it as well.
Okay.
All these tools, they have ways of allowing students to communicate with a wider audience. That seems to be like one of the big motivators for the different tools that are coming out there. So I'm hoping to see more teachers use that kind of stuff. So the other thing that's important is, like, when I was writing this article today, trying to get from substitution closer to past augmentation to what's the next step? I can't even remember right now. But trying to get to the point where you want people creating content, and that's the kind of stuff that it's hard to do, but it doesn't have to be massive. But creating some kind of content, that's you're going to a deeper level of sophistication when you're using your digital technology. So something like Seesaw is a good content creation tool. Blogging is, podcasting is, all those things, because you're creating something new. And I think that's where we want to head. That's, going back to the teacher, okay, how do I become more connected? You might be a different question, like, how do I start creating content?
Right. So what content needs to be there, and those sorts of things going on. Mm-hmm. I'm starting to hear myself coming back at me. Anyway, so anything else you want to touch on, Paul, here before we both get back to roaming the hallways of our schools?
I think that's a great question. I think it's kind of cool to go off of other people's questions. If you get more, that's a good way to go. It's kind of, I'm always interested in find out what people's questions are. So I'm happy to continue having those kind of conversations. It's actually more interesting, I think, to go off of what other people are curious about. It's easy enough to sit here and for me and you to talk about the cool things that we yeah. Oh, I'm doing this. This is really cool. Well, I'm glad you find it cool. But it's actually not all that. Like, I get the same thing when I go home. I said, "Well, I'm doing all this stuff, and this is very, very cool." And I said, "Oh yeah," and my wife's a teacher, so I said, what might be interesting for me doesn't really extend beyond. I think what's most interesting, what I'm really interested in, not so much what I like or what I want to do. I'm really curious to hear where teachers are and what they want to learn about. Like, I'm fascinated by that stuff right now. So as a model, all I'd have to say, before rushing out and doing stuff again, is that I think this is a very good model, especially if you get more listeners. And also for this teacher, again, if this teacher listened to this tonight, that's empowering, because we've just spent, like, I don't know, well, half an hour talking about her question. And I think that's useful. There's some good that comes out of that.